Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Phantom Limb. The waves crashed against the rocky shores of the Isle of Wight, the constant roar backdrop to the isolation Holly Arnold had sought. After returning from the war, the island seemed like the perfect place to mend, away from the pitying eyes of the world. She'd left behind a part of herself on the battlefield, her right arm. In its place, surgeons had fitted a state-of-the-art prosthetic. The metal gleamed, slick and polished, starkly contrasting with the worn skin of her remaining limbs. Holly, however, couldn't shake the unease that came with it. At first, it was small things. She'd wake in the middle of the night, her new arm resting in an unfamiliar position, fingers curled in strange contortions. "Oh, it's just an adjustment." They had shrugged off her concerns, leaving her alone to come to terms with the foreign object now attached to her body. The Isle of Wight, with its brooding cliffs and dense fog, felt like a place forgotten by time. Holly moved into an old stone cottage perched on the edge of a crag, facing the sea. It had belonged to a reclusive artist who had vanished mysteriously a few years prior. Holly appreciated the isolation, thinking the time alone would help her reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But the arm was always there, cold and feeling, and it began doing things. At first it was subtle. She would catch it twitching on its own, fingers flexing involuntarily when she wasn't looking. One evening, while sketching the coastline, she noticed that her drawings began to deviate without her control. What should have been gentle strokes to outline the cliffs turned jagged, violent, as her prosthetic hand slashed across the page, filling it with dark, contorted shapes. Each time, it left behind twisted, grotesque images of bodies tangled in what appeared to be thorny vines. The drawings, unnervingly detailed, bore resemblance to the figures she had seen in battle, soldiers lying still in the mud, their limbs bent unnaturally. "Stop it," she muttered one evening. But the hand didn't stop. One night, Holly awoke to a strange sound, like the clicking of mechanical parts in the dark. Her breath caught in her throat. She sat up in bed, staring at her prosthetic arm, which now rested limply against her side. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw something horrifying. Her arm wasn't still. It was moving, slowly, purposefully. Fingers flexed, curling and uncurling as though testing their range of motion. Her breath quickened. She willed it to stop, but the prosthetic seemed to have its own agenda. It reached toward her throat. Holly screamed, grabbing at the arm with her left hand, struggling to keep it from closing around her neck. She fought for what felt like an eternity, finally managing to wrest control back, panting heavily as she collapsed onto her bed. The doctors had said the arm was supposed to respond to her neural signals, but this was something else. The next morning she packed her bags, intending to leave the island. But the more she tried to escape, the more her arm resisted. As she shoved clothes into a duffel bag, the hand seized her by the wrist, tightening with such force that her skin bruised. She dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face as the arm held her still. The island didn't want her to leave. Days turned into weeks, and Holly found herself trapped in the cottage. The arm began leading her places, guiding her movements against her will. Her nights were restless, filled with vivid dreams of shadowy figures reaching out to her, whispering in voices she couldn't understand. During the day, the arm would jerk her hand toward strange, forbidden places. One afternoon, while exploring the cliffs, she came across a cave she hadn't noticed before. Its entrance was partially hidden by ivy and overgrown bushes, as though nature itself sought to keep it concealed. She tried to turn back, but her prosthetic arm wouldn't allow it. It gripped the rocks, pulling her toward the entrance, dragging her closer despite her protests. Inside the cave, the air was damp and heavy. The deeper Holly went, the more she felt like something was watching her. Shadows danced on the walls, and in the dim light, she could see faint carvings etched into the stone. They depicted ancient rituals, sacrifices made to gods long forgotten. Holly's heart pounded in her chest. Suddenly her arm jerked her to the ground, forcing her fingers into a crevice in the cave floor. With a sickening crack, the stone gave way, revealing something buried beneath a box, ancient and covered in symbols she didn't recognize. Her metal fingers traced the outline of the lid, and despite her screams of resistance, the hand pried it open. Inside lay the remains of an arm, withered and blackened with age, yet somehow familiar. Holly recoiled in horror, but her prosthetic moved closer, its fingers intertwining with the skeletal ones. A surge of electricity shot through her, and for a brief moment her mind was filled with images of death, destruction, and dark rituals performed on the island centuries ago. The arm wasn't just a prosthetic, it was possessed. Whatever force had created it, whatever ancient evil had once inhabited the island, had now latched onto her. She realized, in that moment, that the arm had chosen her. It had been waiting for her. Desperation clawed at her, but she could no longer control her own body. The arm moved with a mind of its own, leading her out of the cave, back toward the cliffs. Holly tried to resist, but her body no longer responded. As the wind whipped through her hair and the sea roared below, the arm dragged her to the edge of the precipice. She looked out over the churning waters, her heart racing, her mind screaming for freedom, but it was no use. The arm tightened its grip, and with a final, brutal tug, it threw her over the edge. The last thing Holly saw before the darkness claimed her was the jagged rocks below, waiting like ancient teeth, eager for the sacrifice. But her body never hit the rocks. Instead, she floated, suspended in midair, as the arm seemed to pulse with unnatural energy. The shadows around her grew longer, darker, until they swallowed her whole. She was no longer Holly Arnold, the war veteran from the Isle of Wight. She had become something else. Something ancient. And her arm was no longer the only thing with a mind of its own. Holly hung in the void between life and death, her mind unraveling as the arm's power coursed through her. She could feel it now, truly feel it, not just the metal against her skin, but the will behind it. It was no mere prosthetic, it was a conduit, a vessel for something much older, much darker, than anything she had ever known. As she floated above the jagged rocks, the sea roiling beneath her, the memories came flooding back, not her own, but memories of others. She saw the island through different eyes, a soldier, a sailor, a priest, and even the reclusive artist who had once lived in her cottage. Each of them had been drawn to this place, each had succumbed to the power that lurked beneath the island's surface. They, too, had been chosen, and they, too, had fallen. The arm, the phantom limb, had been with them all, a cursed relic passed down through the ages, seeking out those who were broken, who had lost something vital. It offered them a replacement, a second chance, but it always came at a cost. Now it had chosen Holly, and she was its latest vessel. But Holly wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. With a surge of willpower, she fought against the pull of the arm, struggling to regain control of her body. The shadows tightened around her, but she pushed back, focusing all her energy on resisting the ancient force that had claimed her. She screamed, her voice echoing through the void, and for a brief moment she felt the arm loosen its grip. She fell. Time slowed as she tumbled toward the rocks, the wind howling in her ears. The jagged stones loomed closer, and Holly braced herself for the impact. But just as she was about to hit, the arm moved again, this time to save her. With a violent jolt, the prosthetic slammed into the cliffside, embedding its metal fingers deep into the stone. Holly dangled there, gasping for breath, her heart racing in her chest. She had regained control, but she knew it was only temporary. The arm wasn't done with her yet. She pulled herself up, using the strength of the prosthetic to climb back onto solid ground. Her body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She had to find a way to sever the connection between her and the arm before it consumed her completely. The cave. It had all started there, in that ancient hidden cave. Whatever force was controlling the arm had originated from that place, and Holly knew that if she was going to break free, she had to go back. She stumbled toward the cave, the path now eerily familiar. The wind howled around her, the fog thickening as she approached the entrance. The ivy that had once concealed the cave had receded, as if the island itself was beckoning her in. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, the darkness swallowing her whole. The air was thick, oppressive, and the carvings on the walls seemed to shift and writhe as she passed. The box was still there, open, the skeletal arm inside gleaming faintly in the dim light. Holly approached it cautiously, her metal fingers twitching involuntarily. She could feel the pull stronger than ever now. The arm wanted her to reach out to touch the relic again, to complete the ritual that had been interrupted centuries ago. But Holly wasn't going to let it win. With a cry of defiance, she grabbed a nearby rock and smashed it into the skeletal arm. The bones shattered, disintegrating into dust, and the box cracked open, spilling its contents onto the cave floor. For a moment there was silence. Then a low rumble echoed through the cave, the ground beneath her feet shaking violently. Holly staggered back, her heart racing as the cave walls began to close in. The shadows thickened, swirling around her, and she could hear the whispers again, faint at first, then louder, more insistent. The arm jerked violently, pulling her toward the center of the cave. Holly fought against it, digging her heels into the ground, but the force was too strong. She was dragged toward the altar, the shadows coiling around her like living things, their whispers growing louder, more frenzied. No, she screamed. But it was too late. The shadows enveloped her, pulling her into the darkness. She could feel their arm tightening around her, its cold metal fingers sinking into her skin. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with dark, terrible knowledge, secrets of the island's past that no mortal should ever know. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness receded. Holly found herself standing on the edge of the cliff once more, the sea crashing below her. The wind was still, the fog had lifted, and the island was silent. Too silent. She looked down at her arm, expecting to see the same cold, unfeeling metal she had grown accustomed to. But instead the prosthetic was gone. In its place was something else, something alive. Her arm had regrown, but it was no longer hers. The skin was pale, almost translucent, the veins beneath it dark and pulsing with a strange, unnatural energy. The fingers twitched, moving of their own accord, as if testing their newfound freedom. Holly stared at it in horror, her mind racing. She had won. She had severed the connection. But the phantom limb was still with her. It had simply taken on a new form. And now it was a part of her. Forever. As Holly stood on the edge of the cliff, the wind picking up once more, she realized the truth. The island had claimed her, just as it had claimed those before her. The arm wasn't just a relic, a cursed object, it was the island itself. And now Holly Arnold was bound to it, her body and soul intertwined with the ancient, malevolent force that lurked beneath the surface of the Isle of Wight. She turned away from the cliff, her new arm flexing, her fingers curling into a fist. She could feel the island's pull, stronger than ever now, guiding her, whispering to her. There was no escape. And deep down, Holly knew that she no longer wanted to escape. She was the island's now, and the island was hers. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.